start the recording now. Lovely having you all today. My name is, as I said before, Dr. Alma Mikulinski, and I work for Innovate Cities as their Director of Intellectual Infrastructure and Partnerships. I have with me today Ann Cavoukian that I will introduce in a second. Before we start our Smart Cities of Privacy webinar, I would like to first and foremost acknowledge that the work that we do takes place on the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, which is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people, all of whom cared for these lands since time immemorial. Innovate Cities, for those who are new to the organization, is a community of innovators creating more inclusive, livable, and sustainable cities. A first of its kind, Innovate Cities is a not-profit helping drive smart cities innovation and commercialization by providing innovators with the building blocks they need to connect, create, and scale. Innovate Cities was founded in 2018 with the goal of advancing the development and commercialization of Canadian smart cities innovation, protecting data and preserving the privacy of Canadians. And by doing so, positioning Canada as a leader in smart cities. We were fortunate enough to have this ambitious vision recognized early on by the federal government. And we are generously supported with a grant from the Federal Economic Development Agency, Fed of Ontario. Thank you to our federal partners, as they like to be called, for their support. One of the key principles of Innovate Cities is our commitment to privacy, as well as our novel approach to privacy combined with data governance, consistent with privacy by design principles. We are fortunate enough to have, received the blessing as well as the support of Dr. Ann Cavoukian, who is our Chief Privacy Officer. Ann, as many of you know, is recognized authority and one of the world leading experts on privacy. Dr. Cavoukian has served an unprecedented 3 terms as an Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, Canada. There she created Privacy by Design, a framework that seeks to proactively embed privacy into the design specification of information technologies, networked infrastructure, and business practices, thereby achieving the strongest protection possible. In 2010, international privacy regulators unanimously passed a resolution recognizing Privacy by Design as an international standard. Since then, Privacy by Design has been translated into 40 languages. Also with us, we have Hugh O'Reilly. Hello, Hugh, who is the Executive Director of Innovate Cities and President and CEO of Equity Global. Hugh is the former President and Chief Executive Officer of OP Trust. He is currently on the board of Vancity Community Investment Bank and is a Senior Fellow with the C.D. Howe Institute and the Executive in Resident with the Global Risk Institute. Welcome to you and welcome to Ann. And hello to everyone in the audience. Just a few house notes. Feel free to add your question to the Q&A chat. And we will have some time for questions at the very end. So let's start after the sort of formal introduction that I just gave to both Ann and Hugh. Perhaps, Ann, you could start by telling us a little bit more about your background, specifically with emphasis on your work in the smart city sector.
Of course. Thank you, Alma. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be speaking to you. There's so much happening in the smart cities arena, and I'm delighted to be working with Innovate Cities because they're committed to embedding privacy by design into the essence of the smart city work that we do. I'll just give you a little bit of my background in terms of how I got interested in smart cities and how I started working with them. Dating back to 2018, I was working, Schulich invited me to join them on a conference they were doing on smart cities. So I started there. And shortly after that, Sidewalk Labs, which you may have heard of, an Alphabet-based company, was a successful bidder to build a smart city here in Toronto, which is where I live. So I wanted to make sure this was going to be a smart city of privacy, not a smart city of surveillance. The majority of smart cities in the world, I'm on the International Council of Smart Cities. They're all smart cities of surveillance. Smart cities in the Far East, Shanghai, Dubai, no notion of privacy whatsoever. And we can't have that here, not at all. So when Sidewalk Labs was successful in bidding for the Toronto Smart City, they approached me and they said, we'd like to retain you to build privacy by design embedded into the smart city we envision here for Toronto. Needless to say, I was delighted with that because I live here. The last thing I want was a smart city of surveillance. So I was so pleased, and I quickly joined them and agreed, and I was very grateful. So when I first started checking out the landscape in the smart city field, what I came to realize very soon was that the technologies that were going to be employed in smart cities, and which were so expensive, all the sensors, et cetera, they were going to be on 24/7 all the time. And they were going to be collecting data automatically. There was no notion of obtaining consent from individuals whose data might have been captured, not whatsoever. So I went back to Alphabet, to Sidewalk Labs, and I said, look, we have to de-identify data at source. By that, I meant the minute any data is picked up by any of the sensors or the tech that you have all throughout the city, before you use it in any capacity, we have to scrub it of all personal identifiers and do that very carefully. I don't mean just remove a license plate number or a name. There are strong ways to de-identify data. And they agreed to that. They agreed to de-identifying data at source because everyone understood that this was going to be an essential component. See, privacy by design is all about privacy and data utility. When you de-identify the data at source, right at the time it's collected, then you're free to use the data for a variety of invaluable purposes in a smart city without having the privacy risk associated with it because it was scrubbed of the personal identifiers. No personal identifiers, no privacy risk. Win-win. So they went along with that and there was no problem for quite some time. We were planning it through. And then the problems arose after that. And really, it was unrelated to privacy. Jim Balsillie didn't like the fact that Sidewalk Labs was a successful vendor, and he started criticizing them and the way they were going to use the data, and all these problems arose. So they're very concerned about this. And they said, okay, we've built a data trust consisting of all the players who are going to participate in this exercise so that everyone can have a say. It's not just going to be us. And the notion of a data trust is not new. It's followed extensively. Ernst & Young have an excellent data trust. Innovate Cities has a great data trust. We can do this. But the problem was the following. And I remember being at the board meeting when Sidewalk Labs said this. And this was the only thing they didn't consult me on because they knew what I would say. At the board meeting, they said, we are building this data trust. All of you will have a voice. It's not just going to be us, Sidewalk Labs. You will all be able to participate and govern the data, et cetera. And then they said the following. They said, and of course, we can't make you do anything. You're independent parties, IT companies, et cetera. We will encourage you to de-identify the data at source, but we can't make you do that. That has to be your choice. And I knew the minute they said that, I had to leave. I had to resign, which I did the following morning. Because you see, if you make this a voluntary choice, no one's going to do it. People love data. They love identifiable data. They're going to collect as much data as possible. So I knew privacy was gone if that's what they were going to do. And the irony of it is that had Sidewalk Labs approached me about this originally, I would have said to them, give me 1 week. Let me go talk to Waterfront Toronto, who was the governing body hiring Sidewalk Labs, et cetera. Let me go to them and say to them, please tell anyone who wants to play with us, so to speak, in creating this smart city, you must de-identify data at source. they would have done that. And we could have avoided this problem. But Sidewalk Labs didn't do that. So the next morning, I resigned. And people went nuts. Dr. Off called me from New York City saying, what's going on? Is this a mistake? The people who had retained me at Sidewalk Labs were upset. They were surprised. I said, how could you be surprised? This is the one thing you didn't consult me on. And you know that to me, it's all about de-identifying the data. And it won't happen if you leave it as a personal choice. And the irony was later, another hour or two later, Waterfront Toronto, when they heard this, they contacted me directly. And they said, come work with us. We believe in de-identifying data at source. We'll make them do that. Come work with us. So it was kind of ironic. But it was such an interesting story because never has there been, I mean, I get contacted by the media all the time. I've never had as many media requests as I did on this story from all around the world. I'm talking Europe, Asia, Africa. I mean, it's crazy. It became such a big story because everyone wants to build smart cities. And how do you do it and how do you preserve privacy? This is an evolving field. And so it was critical that we had to take this seriously. And people were so surprised that I would leave, a lucrative contract with Sidewalk Labs because they weren't going to do this. And
I think this might be a great segue to ask you precisely about that. Hugh O'Reilly, ED of Innovate Cities, very much internally, we find ourselves talking a lot about the lessons of Sidewalk Labs. Hugh, would you like to perhaps tell our audience the way in which, as an organization, we're learning the lessons as well as improving upon this model that Anne just described? You're on mute, Hugh.
Hazard of having a dog that can be quite active in the background. What I would say is, Sidewalk Labs pursued their initiative and did it in a certain way. But I think the key lesson for us was, first of all, we take the word trust quite seriously. And we think it's important for us to earn the trust of people who live and work in the urban centers that we are active in. So that's the first point. The second point is we're a not-for-profit. And we want to run our data trust, which we call City Shield, as a public utility on a cost basis. And we're not in the business of making money from selling information. Fundamentally, when you look at Google or Alphabet, and they're a fabulous company. What they've achieved is amazing, but they're fundamentally a company that sells information, and it's very, very difficult for them to navigate this field. I think it's quite a bit easier for us because we're not in the business of selling ads. We're in the business of trying to make the urban environment better for people who live and work there. We think the data collected on a de-identified basis and then further protections that we will have in place, we think that data can be used by innovators, by municipalities, by building owners to make the urban environment better for people who live and work there, so that we can make some strides on everything from climate to, because we can regulate temperature better, to public safety, to providing people services when they're in the buildings and when they're doing things. So I think that's the fundamental difference. And we have taken the issue of privacy seriously from the beginning. We've thought about how we're going to communicate. We approached Anne early on, and we involve her in our processes. Not to say that we don't have some great arguments, and not to say that we agree on everything, but it's all designed with making sure that the issue of privacy, we can demonstrate to people who live and work in cities that we take it seriously, and we're doing it in a way where we're going to hold ourselves accountable.
Thank you, Hugh. You mentioned our data trust, of course, as a part of our larger commitment to privacy. Could you please shed a little bit of light? What is a data trust? And specifically, what is the Innovate Cities data trust?
So the Innovate Cities data trust we call City Shield. And a data trust is what it says it is. It is designed to collect information and to hold it in a central place, or to use the mechanism of the data trust to gain access to data perhaps held by others. So for example, you might have an organization, a university or a think tank that has information. They don't necessarily have to deposit in our data trust, but if they can make it available to us, we would seek to have it made available to us so that, for example, innovators could go into our data trust and they would be able to use the information that's held there to help them perfect their products, because it's a little bit of a cliche nowadays, but data is the raw material of innovation. So we are building this data trust with sightlines. We're going to also store data in Canada with one of our partners, ThinkOn. That's also a distinction with the Sidewalk Labs. So no one will have to worry about being subject to the laws of another country or the US provisions of the Patriot Act. So a data trust fundamentally is we hold the information, we store it in Canada, we have access to it, and we grant access to innovators to use the data. The data we hold is de-identified, but having said that, we will have contracts with anyone who enters into a relationship with us to use our data, that they must maintain its privacy, and we will audit periodically to make sure that they do that.
Thank you, Hugh. I think one of the key components of our data trust, and again, circling back to the notion of privacy, is the fact that we've decided to abide by both GDPR, the highest standards known to, well, currently enforced in the world, as opposed to wait for local legislation to keep up with the changes, as well as, of course, Anne's own privacy by design. I was wondering, Anne, if you can, given the fact that, of course, also privacy by design principles also have informed GDPR, can you give an overview of the framework and the main principle?
Of course. There are 7 foundational principles to privacy by design. And let me just put a context around privacy by design as opposed to regulatory compliance. When I first became privacy commissioner, my background is different. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a psychologist. I study psychology and the law, but I bring a very different perspective to it. So when I joined the commission, and there's all these brilliant lawyers, it was a very different approach we brought to it. Regulatory compliance is after the fact, after the privacy infraction or data breach, and then you apply the law and you get a good outcome. I wanted something different. In addition to that, I wanted a proactive model of prevention where you could ideally prevent the harms from arising, much like a medical model of prevention. That to me was ideal. And so I created privacy by design, literally at my kitchen table over 3 nights, and I brought it to the office and I tried to sell it to the lawyers, which I did over time, but it was a very different approach. So I'll just run you through it very quickly, the 7 principles. I've already talked about them. First one is be proactive, try to prevent the harms from arising. Very, very important. The second one, privacy as the default setting. This is really important. Privacy as the default is the exact opposite of what happens, largely speaking, now. Now, if you want your privacy protected, you're expected to search through all the legalese and the privacy policy and all the terms of service to find the opt-out box that says, do not use my personal information for any purpose other than the primary purpose of the data collection that I've consented to. The reality is, it takes way too long to do that, hours. Life is short. No one does that. But it doesn't mean that people don't care deeply about privacy. In the last 2 years, concern for privacy has been at an all-time high. 90% of those surveyed are concerned about their privacy. 92% concerned about loss of control over their personal information. And privacy is all about retaining personal control over the use and disclosure of your information. Privacy as the default setting flips that on its head, and it says to people, you don't have to ask for privacy. You don't have to search for an opt-out box. We give it to you automatically. We can only use your personal information for the primary purpose of the data collection, the intended purpose that you agreed to, that you consented to. Beyond that, we can't use your information for anything else. If down the road a secondary use arises that we'd like to use your personal information for, we have to come back to you and seek your personal consent again for the secondary use. This is a game changer. It builds trust like no other, and there's such a trust deficit right now. Companies that have gotten certified for privacy by design have told me that this has built trusted business relationships when they were completely waning. So it is extremely valuable. Privacy is the default. And I should say that since you mentioned the GDPR in the EU, they have added not only privacy by design to the GDPR, but also privacy as the default. That's how big a deal this is. It's huge. Third one, privacy embedded in design is absolutely critical, because if you embed privacy measures into your operations, bake it into the code, you can't forget about it. It's in your design. It's always present and always functioning. It's great. Privacy, I have this thing about zero-sum games, and that's the next one. Zero-sum is the dated view of you can only have one interest versus another, privacy versus security, or privacy versus data utility. And I can assure you, it's never privacy that wins over the other interest, nor am I suggesting it should, but it sure as heck isn't going to lose out. So I want you to abandon the zero-sum game of either or, win-lose, and substitute positive sum, which just means you can have two positive gains at the same time. Privacy and data utility, privacy and security, privacy and marketing. People laugh. They think, you're pro marketing? I said, look, privacy is not anti-marketing. It's pro-choice. Let people decide what they want for themselves. So this is very important. Then we'll talk about security. While the term privacy subsumes a much broader set of protections than security alone, in this day and age of daily hacking and phishing expeditions, if you don't have a solid foundation of security from end to end with full lifecycle protection, you're not going to have any privacy. So you have to pay attention to security and build it in right from the beginning. The sixth one is give people access to their own information. Individuals should have a right of access to their data. I say to companies and governments, you may have custody and control over someone's personal information, but it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the data subject. So give them a right of access to their own data. And what companies love about this is what they've told me. They love it because they win, because when people look at their own data, they can identify mistakes. They can tell you, oh, that was 2 years ago. Here's what applies now. They correct the data, so they increase the quality of the data. Companies love it. Governments love it. It makes it far more accurate. And the last principle is just keep it user-centric. When you have it focused on the user, the data subject, all of this fits into place because it's all about the user's data and keeping it focused on the user. So that's all of privacy by design. To me, it's like motherhood, but I know it's not to most people, and I'm happy to help them with it.
I think it's remarkable that privacy by design was created in 2010, and slowly but surely, it was gaining traction, and then suddenly now it becomes almost vernacular, something that people adopt, not always knowing the full implications of committing to such comprehensive ideas regarding privacy. But I know, again, at Innovate Cities, it truly resonates with the values that you described as so essential to our DNA as an organization.
I'm delighted.
Also, you, though, this is not the only thing that we do in order to make sure that we run our operations in the most honest and trustworthy way possible. Hugh, could you speak a little bit to the notion of the governance model that we've created around Innovate Cities and the data trust in particular?
Sure, I'd be delighted to, Alma, and just to build on a couple of things. First of all, privacy by design is our fundamental principle in terms of how we will manage data that's held in the data trust. The second thing is, and I know this was alluded to earlier in your question, Alma, but the issue of we want to exceed existing Canadian standards. And we want to do that because we think GDPR is a very good model, the European model. We also think that if we wait for the legislation, we will always be behind the highest standard. So those are the fundamental reasons why we want to use GDPR. But we've also put in place very strong governance mechanisms to ensure that we are acting in accordance with the principles that we've given lip service to. So first and foremost, we have retained Anne to be the Chief Privacy Officer of the Data Trust and Innovate Cities. Anne will report directly to the board. She won't report to the board through me. Second, individuals who feel that their information hasn't been properly dealt with by Innovate Cities or City Shield or Data Trust, they will have the ability to make a formal complaint to Anne, and will also have the ability to investigate their complaint. Second, the Data Trust will be governed by the Innovate Cities Board of Directors, but we're not, as I indicated before earlier. The third provision that we want to put in place is we will have an advisory board who are experts on privacy matters, who will help us keep, in addition to Anne's keeping us apprised of the latest developments, so too will this advisory board. And then last, we plan to do annual privacy audits of City Shield, our data trust. And the results of that audit will be disclosed to Anne. It'll be disclosed to our board, the advisory board that we have, and will also be disclosed to the public. Because we want to make sure that our governance structures are clear. We want to make sure that the manner in which we deal with individual data is transparent. And we also want to make sure that there's an accountability mechanism, both in terms of having advisors on keeping up with the best practices, but also in terms of having an independent privacy officer, and finally, in terms of an audit that gets disclosed publicly every year. We think this package, this governance package, this approach provides us with the best way of maintaining accountability, transparency, and best practices, and in building trust. And then the other thing is, we're hopeful that this approach to governance will allow for continuous improvement, because what is a best practice today is going to not be a best practice tomorrow. And instead of catching up to stay current with them.
One thing that you alluded to, and again, this is in relationship to the tendency of legislation to lag behind the reality, which specifically in our day and age is simply the quick pace in which technology moves ahead. It will simply be impossible for legislation to keep up with those technological changes. Another thing that we do that I would love if you can speak about is our partnership with CIO Strategy Council and the creation of standards around privacy and data sharing.
Yeah, CIO Strategy Council is one of the founding bodies when it comes to Innovate Cities, and they're amongst many things they do. They develop standards for best practices when it comes to technological matters, and indeed when it comes to privacy standards and privacy standards that apply to things like data trust. And we are active with the CIO Strategy Council. We participate in their standards making, and we will abide by their standards. And the other beauty of their approach to this is, because the reality is, just to take a step back for a second, legislation takes a long time to get enacted. Necessarily and appropriately, a lot of people comment on legislation as it comes forward. So currently the federal government has Bill C-11 that is, I think, is in process, but it's by no means complete. There are a lot of critics of C-11. Some argue it doesn't go far enough. Some argue it, and there's at least one person on this call that I'm aware of who argues that it doesn't go far enough, that being Anne. Others argue that it goes too far, but we don't want to be caught in that process. We want to be always in the best practice. The CIO strategy they do is they develop national standards. They do it by working with interested parties, and they make sure that the standards are high ones. So we're glad to be part of their process, and we are glad that they're out there promulgating these standards, because it gives us another basis upon which we can govern our activities and our approach to privacy.
Thank you, Hugh. Just to the those who participate in the webinar, if you have questions, feel free to please ask them in the Q&A functionality, because we will have a few minutes, about 10 minutes for questions at the end of this. And as you know, so much of our thinking internally, and of course, the way in which we then build our services and products is based on your thinking. So even, for example, the title of this webinar, Smart Cities of Privacy, to me, it was a direct result of conversations that we had, and the way in which you say smart cities of surveillance is something that happens internationally. And you often give examples for cities around the world, Asia, Middle East, and so forth, where the technology, as you said before, is on 24/7. And the way in which data is then being collected without personal consent of individuals over data and so forth. The model in which we're working, which, as I said, so much informed by your thinking and your work, how would you say we're doing so far? The way in which we have engaged you in conversation. Can you speak a little bit about our internal process?
You're doing great, because you include me on virtually all developments, and you include me on the work with the data trust, and you allow me to object to things, which may not be exactly what he wants to hear, but doesn't happen that often. But when it does happen, you listen. And I'm delighted with that, because this is the ease with which surveillance can creep up in a smart city is staggering, and you don't even know what's happening. And that's why I always take such a firm line to prevent anything from allowing to take place. I mean, you look at smart cities, you look at China, for example, my God, they know everything about everyone, the social credit scores. I mean, it is appalling to me, the level of surveillance there. And yes, their cities are very efficient and smart and etc., but who would want to live there? There's no freedom, there's no privacy. Privacy forms the foundation of our freedom, and it's critical. That's why I am delighted to be working with you, because you are very respectful of privacy. And occasionally when I do raise, I don't want to say objections, but questions or problems or things, you address them and you allow me to speak to these issues. So I'm very grateful, the kind of relationship we have. And I want to make it clear, smart cities are growing everywhere. You know, I had a call last week from the States in Michigan. Ford is building a central smart city-like venture in the Detroit area, and they're very interested in this, and they want to look at privacy. There's cities in Canada that are now beginning to explore this. This is just the beginning. So I keep thinking, if we could really give solid attention to privacy at the base of the smart city innovations that you are working on, the rest will unfold. It will become a win-win. Privacy and the amazing developments that will arise in a smart city. And I think that's what we have to be absolutely critical about, and avoid in any possibility the kind of surveillance model coming out in the Far East.
I think also one of the key differences is that our vision of smart cities technology, I'm sorry, there's loud construction outside my house, as well as a husband walking behind me. So one of the main differences in our vision of a smart city is not necessarily efficiency as the first step, but rather the betterment of life of individuals, of residents who live, work, play in cities. And once you put as your North Star this value, it immediately shifts the priorities. Hugh, before I go to question, would you like to respond to Anne's comment just now? You're on mute.
If my, just a couple things I would say is, I think it's important if we're going to be a leading edge organization, and if we're going to develop an approach to smart cities that demonstrates Canada's leadership, both in terms of innovation, our intellectual capital, and what our Canadian values. It's really important that we are challenged in what we do. So we love, and I've told you this before, we love the back and forth with you. We love that it makes us better. And we really are grateful that you're committed to making sure that we uphold the highest standards. Because I think if we don't build trust with people who live, work, and, as you say, Alma, play in the urban environments, none of this is going to work. And I think when we think about a data trust, which it seems to be like a fairly obscure kind of thing. But what lies at it, what the data trust has a capability of doing is, one, making sure that Canada maintains its place as one of the world's leading economies. We have great innovators. We have great post-secondary institutions across this country, a data trust that gives people access to data that's de-identified and anonymized is a fundamental building block to making sure that innovators succeed. So that's one thing it does. The second thing it does is it makes sure that Canada maintains its place as one of the best countries in the world in which to live. Prosperity plays a role, making sure people are employed, whether they're doing software engineering or art history or they're skilled tradespeople. This is all important. And I think that maintaining Canada is a great place to work with a vibrant economy. And then the other aspect that a data trust has is it has the ability to make the places we live and work and play in better. We can use the data collected in a data trust to do a better job in terms of meeting our climate commitments, because the data will be centralized, and individuals who have the ability to think through solutions will have access to it. We'll be able to make our communities safer. We'll be able to make our communities more inclusive. There is no limit to what a data trust is capable of helping us build and achieve. So I think if we have privacy at its core, if we have a mission of building trust in the data trust, and we do it by having strong accountability mechanisms and great governance, I think we can move forward, and we can be a model and a leader in a number of ways, and we can help others see the importance of this. And some of the conversations Anne has had internationally, she's been generous enough to include us. And I think the individuals we talk to in other countries really value the fact of how seriously we take privacy, and they also value the fact that our data trust is based on Canadian innovation, which has a worldwide reputation. And then one last thing that I think this data trust can do, which is really important and just shows you that there are no limits to this, is a data trust has an ability to overcome the digital divide. Because under our model of a data trust, whatever you log in with, whatever device you have, you will have the computing power of our cloud provider. And that potentially is a game changer. It democratizes access to data and to technology. And as we move to a world that's going to go potentially from passwords to digital identity, people who don't have good devices could easily be left out of that. And this, if you think about a data trust that preserves privacy, that handles things the right way, we can play a role in overcoming the digital divide, and that's going to also matter.
Thank you, Hugh. I will now go to both our chat and our Q&A functionality with some questions from the audience. questions that will not be answered, I will make sure to follow up with the individuals and provide them answers to the questions. But I would like to start with the first questions that came through. I believe it will be for Hugh. Are there international examples of data trust which can provide useful lessons or precedents of what has worked and what has not?
There are, and what I would, and Anne's done a ton of work on this and may have some thoughts, but what hasn't worked are data trusts that don't take seriously the idea of preserving privacy. That's number one. Number two, what we're doing, which I'm happy, you know, as you do periodically, and correct me if I'm wrong, but our notion of a not-for-profit public utility data trust is unique. In the world, most data trusts are private and they're powerful and large. For example, and I'm not criticizing these people built these things. Facebook, Google, Amazon are great examples of private data trusts, but we need a counterpoint. We need a public utility that's operated by a not-for-profit, and that the data trust is there not for the organization to profit, but for the innovators, and the people who live, work, and play in the urban environment.
Anne, would you like to add something to the existing data trust?
I agree with the comments you just made. I mean, after all, a data trust, it's a platform designed to enable data sharing among the users. And whenever you talk about data sharing, you've got to be very, very careful, because if there is personally identifiable data in that data that is being used, then privacy goes out the window. So it's so critical to be sensitive to the privacy concerns and address them right up front, so that the data that is made available to the data trust to enable data sharing is free from privacy risks. The personal identifiers have been scrubbed at source, which is why I always insist upon that. And then you free the data to be used in a wide variety of very valuable purposes. But that's why you have to address privacy issues first. And Innovate Cities Data Trust does that like no other.
Thank you, Anne. One thing that I would love if either one of you or both of you can comment on is the question or the response of cities to Canada and abroad to the data trust and privacy by design initiatives.
First of all, I think when we talk about the municipal sector in Canada, look, these are the governmental institutions that are the most people-facing of all governmental institutions, and they have, in so-called normal times, they have a lot on their plates. In a pandemic, hopefully heading to a post-pandemic world, their plates are really jammed up. So we've had conversations with a number of municipalities. There's definitely interest, but we need to, one thing Innovate Cities has as a core challenge is making sure that we're viewed as a trusted problem solver, and we can work in partnership with the municipalities that way. So their jobs are very complicated, and we want to make it as easy as possible. And at the same time, we want to respect the fact that they've got their own technology projects where they're trying to get the data out of various silos. There's lots of complexity here. We think we can play a role helping with this.
Yeah, and I agree. Cities are certainly addressing these issues. To what extent will be determined in the future. But for example, you've got the city of Mississauga. They're developing a smart city, and they're very, very in tune with the privacy issues. They want to embed privacy by design. So I think there is a lot of interest in this. I mentioned the Detroit Ford example that had contacted me recently. So privacy, I think, is top of mind for a lot of these smart cities.
Yeah, and the challenge for Innovate Cities, to be quite honest, is we need to present ourselves as somebody that's easy to work with, that we can help take problems. We can work with our municipal partners in solving problems.
Exactly.
I believe we have perhaps time for one more question. It's interesting because so many of the questions are so rich that it feels like they could populate a webinar in themselves.
So, but I have an idea here, Anne. And Alma, I'm going to put you on the spot, Ann. So I
Oh,
I guess it's a turnabout is fair play, as they say. There's a number of really detailed questions I've noted. So I'm wondering if you would be willing, the two of us, to do kind of a Q&A with people who are interested. We'll do a webinar. It'll just be on Q&A because there are PhD students. There's some really amazing stuff that I've just glanced at. And I think that it's such a rich and dynamic field. If you'd be willing to do that, I'm sorry for putting you on the spot. And doesn't exist. It's my fault. I don't want anyone.
Hugh, it would be my pleasure to do that. It really would. And I would love to work with these people because I also want to make it very clear. It's never privacy versus security. It's not, CIOs versus CPOs. It's you have to work together. It has to be a positive sum mindset where each party adds to the other and you interact and the CIOs benefit from the privacy issues and vice versa. So I'm happy to do that, of course, Hugh.
So if maybe if people who are interested in doing a Q&A kind of seminar with us, if you can just, I don't know, like do an emoji thumbs up or something so that we can get a feel for it. And then what we will do is we will advertise it to the 100 or so people who are here. And we will probably also put it out on social media. So if we can get some emojis going, that'd be great.
I also added my email.
So Alma, you were gonna.
I was on mute now.
I spoke over you. I apologize.
No, not at all. I think it's a much fun idea, and actually getting concrete, live interaction as opposed to me trying to. But I have just put my email, my personal email, as opposed to my work email. But please do email me to my work email if you're interested in joining such a more lively and interactive, not offending my panelist here.
This was pretty darn lively, so.
Agreed. And also I will follow up with the individuals that have asked questions, and both in order to arrange the webinar that you just suggested. Thank you, Anne, for being so game.
Oh, it's my pleasure. One more thing. I want people to view privacy as a positive. Don't think of it as a negative. It's not something that holds you back. It opens so many doors because when you address the privacy issues, then you free yourself of the privacy risks and everything improves.
So in consideration of everyone's lunchtime, I want to thank everyone for attending, for the excellent questions. We will follow up as well as Hugh's suggestion to continue this. Hopefully very soon. And I want to thank both Anne and Hugh for just so deeply engaging with the questions, as well as so openly describing the work that we are doing and our vision. I have to say, it's a fun ride. I really, I feel very fortunate to be a part of this organization.
It was a pleasure.
Also want to thank you, Alma, because it's a lot of work to moderate a panel. Appreciate all your hard work. And really want to thank everybody who has signed up, and for the Canadians in the crowd, literally people from around the world are participating in this seminar. And it really speaks to, I think, just how interesting this is and the approach that Anne has taken and her intellectual leadership, as well as our efforts to try and be true to that.
Thank you, everyone.
Both of you.
Alrighty. Thanks very much. Take care.
Okay.
Bye.